One of the things that makes Canva so powerful is the ability to find and customize templates. Whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced designer, having a library of on-brand templates to use not only speeds up your workflow massively, but it also helps build brand recognition. But customizing video and animated templates in Canva can sometimes be a little bit tricky. Now, in my last video, I actually created an animated social media video template. And actually, if you haven't watched that video yet, it might be a good idea just to pause this, go and watch that one, and then come back so that we're all on the same page. I'll wait. So today I'm going to walk you through how I customized that exact template for two completely different styles. And later on in this video, I'm actually going to give you the link to download that exact template for free to use as a starting point for any of your social media videos and to experiment and customize for your own brand. Plus, I will be sharing 10 tips to help you avoid all the common pitfalls and to easily customize this for your brand in Canva. This is the template that we created in that last video. So it has some gradient elements that create a background, it's got some text elements, and then 4 placeholders to use for images or to highlight products, events, people, or anything else. Each of those individual elements or photographs gets its own feature, and then it all comes together at the end where they combine to showcase all 4 again with a call to action, and of course a web address where people can go and find you or find these products, and then a little bit of branding at the end. So first, let's have a look how I customized this template for my own brand to showcase my social media template collection. When I was creating the template, I used a working document just so that I had a bit more space, a bit more screen real estate to play around with different elements. And I brought in this phone frame element here just so that I could see what the background would look like once it was actually in the final document. Now I'm going to do the same thing and create a separate page for what it will look like with my brand elements. So I decided I was going to remove the colored gradient element and also remove the group that had that faded white half circle and the white box at the bottom. And I just replaced them with a single video. So this is just a video from Canva's video library, and that's going to play in the background of all of my slides. Next, of course, I formatted all the text using my brand kit in Canva so that everything was on brand, and changed the colors to match my brand colors. I left the placeholders in as 1, 2, 3, 4, because that way I know exactly what to replace when I get to the actual template. But I did decide that for each of these, I wanted to change the rounding of the corners to be a little less. So I went to border style at the top here, and I changed the corner rounding down to 9 and the border weight down to 1. I also changed the border color to black. So let's have a look how that works once I've input these changes into the template. I start this video with a blank slide just so that it's a nice fade into that first animated slide. And here I just changed it from white to one of my brand colors. I changed the main title on the first slide, and I put my images into the placeholder frames. So here are the 4 collections from my social media template collections. I then used the animated script font for the names of the collections and had them animating as they were in the original template. And then, of course, after each of them has featured with their name coming up, the 4 of them resized to add some interest. I've put a call to action, and I've put the domain where you can go and buy them. And then I just put the final slide, one of my brand images with my logo over it. Now for this one, I've actually kept in that gradient half circle, and although you can't see it because it's the same color as the background, it is there. And because of that, I am able to just replace the top element on the following slides with a Moody image, and it creates a really lovely effect. So again here, I've just replaced it with an image from Canva's library, and I've kept these placeholders as they are for now, and I'll replace them once I have the images I want to put in here. I changed the fonts to something that I felt would fit this kind of Scandi feel a little more, and I've just left the animations as they were. And again at the end, the 4 images enlarge, and then I've changed the call to action and put in another reformatted version of that subheadline. Then I've just used the same image at the end with the branding over it. Now, one of the things I've just noticed is that if I go back here on these slides where each of the images gets profiled or gets enlarged, I feel like there's a little too much space underneath them between the main image and the thumbnails, but not enough underneath that sub-headline. So what I'm going to do is just go to the first one, and I am just going to move this group down a little so that it's closer to those thumbnails and there's a bit more space above it. I'm going to need to do that on the slides that have 2, 3, and 4 so that they are consistent. And the easy way to do that is if I go back to number 1, I can just go up to the ruler, click and drag a guide down. I can align it with the top of the box, and now I know exactly where I need to line up these boxes. So I can just click and drag them and align them with that guide that I put there on each subsequent slide. And it's very quick and easy to make sure that there is then consistency so that everything looks good and works smoothly. Let's have a look at the template itself, and I'll show you some of the tips to help you customize it. So the first tip, which is kind of important, is to always make sure that you check the layers and groups that you're working with. For example, this first slide, although it's very, very short, it looks like there's nothing on it, but if you go to the position tool on the top left and then use the layer panel, you'll see that there's actually a group there. So it's worth noting that, because you may forget about that and find that things seem to have disappeared, and actually it's just because they're on a layer that you weren't aware is there. So I tend to work with this layers tool open, not just so I can see what's there, but also because it makes it very easy for me to select layers, even if they are below other layers. For example, on this slide you can see there are multiple layers, and if I just wanted to access this one, which is near the bottom, I can click on it in the panel and it will select it on my actual working space, and I can then click and move it around or do anything I need to with that. Tip number 2 is to make sure that you check the properties and the animations of any of the elements you're working with. For example, in this template, if I click on this gradient at the top here, you'll notice that it has a fade animation. And if I click on that animation, it brings up the animation panel, which shows me that there is a fade on that background image. And if I scroll down, there's also a rotate effect, which creates some interest in the background, but may not work if you have an image or a video that may look weird when it's rotating. So to get rid of that, I would just click on the rotate motion effect and then click remove animation. And remember, I would then have to do that on each of the subsequent slides. The same thing goes for properties like transparency. I wanted this to be a very subtle color, so the transparency is at 45%. But if I took it up to 100% to fully opaque, you'll see it's a much bolder color, and that may play an impact because if you click and drag another element into this frame, it will be at 45% transparency. So let's change the background on these slides. I'm going to reformat the template so that it's promoting an event called Tomorrow Today, and it's got some speakers talking about futuristic themes, but I want it to be fun and bright. So I am going to go to the videos, and I recently found this video, so I'm going to use this one, but you could just search for a video that fits your theme. As I mentioned, if I click and drag this into here, I need to make sure that the transparency is up so that we can see what it really looks like, and I need to make sure that I have removed that rotate animation so that the video doesn't rotate as well as animate or move on its own. Now I can click and drag that video in. And this is where one of the key tips comes in. When you click and drag a video into any slide or page in Canva, it will reformat the duration of that slide to fit the video length that you're bringing in. So for example, if you have a look in the timeline here, this slide is actually 5.8 seconds. That's how I want it to work. This video is 7 seconds long. So when I click and drag this into this frame, you'll see in the bottom in the timeline that it reformats it and makes it longer. I want it to be the 5.8 seconds that I had before. So I can just click and drag on the right hand side and pull this back to 5.8 seconds. The other thing to note is that if you are not going to have this element rotating, you don't need to worry about the corners cutting off as it moves. So I can actually reformat this frame so that I can possibly get a little more of the video in. So I'm going to bring that over and see what it looks like now so that we can see a little bit of those moving clouds. Once I've resized that video, you can actually see where it ends because the background of this slide is white. So to change that, I'm going to go to the Position tab and the Layers panel again. I'm going to click on the background, and then I'm going to use the color picker to pull a color from the background of that video so that the background of the slide is now matching that. Then I will do the same thing for this group here, which has the faded semicircle and the solid white block. So if I click on that group, you'll see the group is selected, and I can either ungroup it to work with each individual element, or I can actually just click on that element and it will change the highlight to just that part. So for example, if I click here, you'll see that just the semicircle is highlighted. I can then go to my colors and I can pick a color that I've just used or pick a new one. Then I'll go to the white box underneath and do the same thing. That looks great to me, and I want this to be on each of the subsequent slides. So I will go to the Position tool, I will click on those two elements, which are the new elements I want, and I will just copy them using Control-C. Then I go to the next slide, I paste them in, and I move them to the back. and then I'll just delete the two that I no longer want to use. And I will then do that on each of these slides. For the last slide, I'm going to go back to my videos, and I'm going to use this recently used one, drag it in, and make sure it fits the entire slide. And then I'm going to just check on the transparency to make sure that that is fully opaque, and then that will fill in that final slide. The next thing we want to do is replace the images that we had here. Wherever number 1 is, it has to be the exact same image, otherwise the match and move transitions won't create this cool little animation for us. I am just going to go to our images, and I'm going to search for portraits, and I'm going to filter by color for purple. And that way it'll give us some really fun portraits that I can click and drag into here. So now I know number 1 has to be the person in yellow that we used there. So I'm just going to go through each of these and drag that image wherever number 1 appears. And if we go back to the beginning, we can just click and drag this playhead, and we can see that the animation works for that first one, for number 1 in this series. And on each subsequent slide, it will animate correctly. Now I'm going to go through and just fill in numbers 2, 3, and 4 wherever those placeholders are. Now with the images in, we can play through, and you'll see that those 4 images in the right places mean that the match and move animations will correctly move, showcasing each of these images at a time and allowing the others to reduce to being thumbnails at the bottom. When you're using a video background for any of these slides, a good thing to remember is that you want something that doesn't distract from the content of the actual animation. You want something that just provides context or a nice background. And after all, we're doing this to get a message across. The next thing that we want to do is to change our typeface or our font. So I'm going to go back to the first slide, and I want to change this to something that's more in line with what we're talking about or promoting. So I'm going to change the text first to the name of our event, which is called Tomorrow Today, and then I'm going to change it, and I'm going to put in that font. I'm going to change the size so that it fits. And then I'm going to change the line spacing so that it looks good and it makes sense that we can read everything. Now, once I've done that, I know exactly what I want to use for the rest of these slides, but that all has to be reformatted. And this is where one of the coolest tools that Canva has available can be used. When I click on this text box, I can go to the top here and use this little tool that looks like a paint roller. It's called Copy Style. And what it does is it essentially picks up the style from that element, and you can then paste it to another element in the document. So I'm going to click this to pick up the style from that text box, and you'll see that the little roller goes dark, so you know that it has something attached to it. Now I can go here and I can click on that text box and paste the style. Then I'm going to click on it again and click Copy Style. I'm going to copy from that one and paste on the subsequent slide and do the same process until they are all formatted. And then of course I'm going to just copy and paste the correct title into that text box now that the font has been formatted. Where the script font is on each of these slides, I could put in the name of the person or some kind of highlight or feature that I want to call out. And I'm going to leave them as they are because they kind of fit with the color scheme, and so that works okay. For this slide, I'm going to put in the date rather than while stocks last, and I'm going to resize that so that it's a bit larger. And it's in front of the top of that image to add a little depth. And then on the last slide, I am going to just enlarge the website one so that it adds a bit more impact and move that up a little bit. So there we have it. Those are all our elements now in play. And if we play through, we can see that this animates just as it does in the original template, but has a completely different look and feel. If you ever get stuck when you're reformatting these things and you need a bit more space, I do suggest using a working document like I did so that you've got a little bit more space to play with, and also you can test things out before you can copy and paste them into your final document. It just helps have a bit more screen real estate that you can use to test things out and experiment. Now the last thing I want to do is to just make sure that the timings are all right on these slides and that they all work the way that I wanted them to work originally. And you can just fine-tune this so that everybody has enough time to read what's on the slides, but that you don't take up too much time. Now, sometimes with match and move animations, it gets a little complicated because suddenly you'll see that your match and move doesn't work from one slide to the next. And that's usually something simple like accidentally changing the size of something or the proportion of something. And Canva then doesn't recognize it as the exact same element from one slide to the next, so it doesn't put those smooth animations in between. And there are a couple of things that you can do to make it really easy to keep on top of that. If you ever get stuck where an animation no longer works for you, so for example, if the animation between these two slides no longer showed that the number 1 slide was actually working, it's probably because I accidentally maybe changed the shape of the group so it's now longer rather than square. Now you'll see it just has a subtle fade rather than a movement. That looks pretty good, but you want that movement in there. All you need to do then is just delete that if it's getting complicated, go back to your first slide where you put them in, copy and paste the element again, and then just resize it. And of course you can use guides to help you with that. And then you'll see, because you copy and pasted it from that original slide, it's now the same element, and so the animation will be back in place. So don't be afraid to go back to the beginning or go back to a previous slide, copy and paste those elements to make sure that they're the exact same element you're using on each of the subsequent slides. Sometimes it can be a bit fiddly, but it's worth doing rather than spending hours getting frustrated about why things are not working. The last thing I want to do for this little showcase is I want to add a bit of personality, just as you will want to do for your brand. So I'm going to go to Elements, and I have already searched in these elements for space, and I'm going to click on here, and it's just given me a few elements that I can bring in. Because I've used match and move between each of these slides, if anything isn't the same element from one slide to the next, it will still be there. It will just come in with a little fade. So I'm going to put some planetary bodies in, and you could then just do a different element on each of these slides so that there is some personality that fits with your brand style. And then when you play through, you'll see that these elements are still there with the animated background of the video and the actual match and move animations, and it creates a lot of interest and a really engaging showcase. Now, as I promised, you will be able to get this template in Canva for free. If you go to the link that's on the screen right now or in the description below the video, you can just click on that and you'll be able to enter your details and get access to this Canva template, which will be added to your Canva dashboard, and you can start creating and playing with it there. It's free for you to download and use, and you can use it as many times as you like. Just use the same link to start a fresh version anytime that you want. Also, you'll receive an email that gives you access to this video and the other video that I created around this template. So if you ever need to refer to them and get a bit of a refresher of how it was put together, you've got those in that email, easy for you to access. That's it from me today, folks. I really hope this has been helpful. I know that this can be a little overwhelming sometimes with all the different animations and formatting, but do experiment, play around, have fun with it, and hopefully I will see you using these on your social media channels. Have a fabulous week.